It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the movies of July 14th, 1995. We got 5 movies to look at today, so let's just jump on into it. Let's start off with the biggest new release of the weekend, which was the sequel to Steven Seagal's 1992 blockbuster that was Under Siege 2, Dark Territory. Yeah, needless to say, this was no Die Hard 2. I mean, first of all, you can keep calling him the cook from Under Siege, but that's not going to sound threatening whatsoever. The cook from Under Siege is back. Okay, well, so, but like, this is not a very good sequel. Like, this is not even Die Hard 2. We're pretty much doing the same movie over again, but we can still have fun with it. It's good. It's one of those movies that's just kind of like, it's just not enjoyable whatsoever. It's a really lackluster movie. It doesn't have that same spark that the first movie did. It doesn't help that it's directed by the same guy that did Free Jack, which was not a very good movie when that came out. I will say, though, this was one of the early film scripts, I should say, by Matt Reeves, who would, of course, later go on to do Cloverfield, the Planet of the Apes movies, and, of course, recently the Batman. This movie just gets a little bit too stupid for its own good. Like, it's trying to do what Die Hard 2 did. It's trying to do the same thing. Like, we could do the same thing again, except this time, instead of it being on a ship, it's on a train. And it's just not enjoyable. There's not that fun aspect in this movie in particular that really gives it that edge that the first movie did. Like, the movie just feels kind of empty. It feels like it's a movie that's it's just trying to do the same thing over and over again. It's nothing new. It's nothing that engaging. It's nothing that interesting whatsoever. And if anything that this movie did, on the positive side, it showed that Steven Seagal was kind of a friggin' jerk and probably a sexual offender, because supposedly Jenny McCarthy unsuccessfully auditioned for this, and Seagal auditioned her and asked her to take off her clothes. And then Katherine Heigl, who's in the movie, who's 16 at the time this movie was made, said on the last day of filming that, "I've got girlfriends your age, isn't that?" And she says, "Isn't that legal?" And he says, "They don't seem to mind." So, yeah, needless to say, this was not the movie that Steven Seagal probably wants to be remembered for. And I mean, really, if you want to see a movie like this that actually works a lot better, go watch Snowpiercer. Or if you want to go back to the classics, go watch Runaway Train with John Boyd and Eric Roberts. Fantastic movie. This is just garbage. Like, this is not a good sequel whatsoever. It's a film that tries to be too much like Die Hard 2, except it's not as enjoyable or exciting. And the villain's not even that interesting either. You got Eric Bogosian from Talk Radio in this as the bad guy. Morris Chestnut's also in here, so is Kurtwood Smith. It's just not a really enjoyable movie. It's not anything interesting. It's not that exciting. And the only reason you'd probably get some enjoyment out of it is to see how bad it gets, because it gets really bad at times. Like, it gets really corny, the action sequences do. And, yeah, Under Siege 2, Dark Territory. It's just not a very good movie. So, with that said, let us move on to the next movie, and that is Hugh Grant in Chris Columbus's follow-up to Mrs. Doubtfire, 9 Months. And if you know what Hugh Grant did around this time, this is a very interesting story that we're going to get into once we show you this. So if you really don't know the story of what happened with Hugh Grant around this time, it was very interesting to say the least. Apparently, so a couple weeks before the movie came out, Hugh Grant was arrested in Los Angeles because he was receiving oral sex in a public place by Hollywood prostitute Divine Brown. Keep in mind, he was he was in, was he married to? He was in a relationship with Elizabeth Hurley at the time, and he pleaded no contest, was fined $1,100, placed on 2 years probation, and was ordered to complete an AIDS education program. And this came 2 weeks before the movie was coming out. And of note here, The Tonight Show with Jay Leno had him booked for the same week, and that first interview since that incident, actually helped The Tonight Show beat David Letterman, who, since he went over to CBS at that time, he was the #1 late night guy. And then this was the thing that turned it back over to Jay Leno. And Grant said that in this interview that he did not make excuses for the incident, and Leno basically famously asked him, "What the hell were you thinking?" Because, I mean, yeah, like, if I have to choose between a prostitute in Hollywood or not Felicity Shagwell, Vanessa Kennington, Vanessa Kennington, excuse me for one second. Vanessa Kensington from Austin Powers. I think I know which one I'm going for here. Good lord, that was a tongue twister and a half. But Grant basically answered and said, "I think you know in life what's a good thing to do and what's a bad thing, and I did a bad thing, and there you have it." So, I mean, I guess that kind of stopped his career. I guess that didn't stop his career too much because, of course, he went on to become. Of course, he kind of went back to being what we all know Hugh Grant to be for a charismatic, charming actor who can be really funny at times. And sure enough, this movie was not one of those movies. In fact, Hugh Grant himself has said that his disappointment at his performance in this movie actually led him to that eventual thing that got him arrested is 2 weeks before the movie came out. But really, you can look at this movie and realize that, wow, even for Chris Columbus, who had made hit after hit with Home Alone 2, and Mrs. Doubtfire, and written all these great movies, and it's just like, this is the best you could come up with after all that? And it's a shame because there is a lot of good talent here. Not only Hugh Grant, Julianne Moore, Tom Arnold, Joan Cusack, Jeff Goldblum, Robin Williams in this movie, Alexa Vega, even Charles Martinet, the voice of Mario, is in this movie too. And there's just so much potential in this movie, and with these actors, they could have made it work, but really, it's just a dull movie. Like, it's not really trying to be anything too creative or funny. It's just trying to be like, hey, we've got all these actors in here. Let's just throw stuff at the wall and make it all about pregnancy jokes and see if any of these stick. And needless to say, it didn't, but it wasn't a big flop at the box office. It still made over 138 million worldwide, so I guess this wasn't a total mess of a film financially, but as a film itself, it's really not that great. And you could definitely see why Hugh Grant was very disappointed by this performance. I think this was actually his first American leading role in a movie that he was, because I think at this point he had been in so many British comedies at this point, but this is, I think, the first one where they put him in a movie where he's the star of an American-centered film, and it just didn't work out like anyone thought it would. So yeah, 9 months was not really all that great. So, with that said, let's get to a much better movie. Let's get to our next movie. Probably one of the most underrated movies of 1995, and that was, of course, The Indian in the Cupboard. I mean, there's so many pieces about this movie that just come together so well. Frank Oz, a really good director. We've talked about a lot of his movies before, especially What About Bob. He's also, of course, has work with the Muppets. He did Little Shop of Horrors, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, House Sitter, The Muppets Take Manhattan. He's made a lot of really good movies as a director, and you also have Melissa Mathison of E.T. fame. And while this definitely doesn't go to the levels of E.T., I love this movie. This is a film that I used to watch all the time when I was a kid, and I was just mesmerized by what I saw here because they really took a lot of the creative elements of that famous book that this was based off of and said, you know what, let's just have a good time with it. Let's just go nuts with it. And like that scene where the main kid, Omri, just figured out what this cupboard could do, and he decides, you know what, I'm going to take my Darth Vader, I'm going to take my dinosaur, I'm going to take my RoboCop figure, I'm going to take all these figures together and just put them in here and watch the chaos happens. And when he opens the door and he sees all this craziness going on, they all look at him like they're about to kill him. He just closes it, just runs straight to his bed and has this look at his face like he just saw his parents get murdered or something. But it's a great scene, kind of terrifying too when you really think about it. There's a lot of moments in this where there are a lot of scary elements to this movie, like the way it's shot, the way the music is playing at times. But at the heart of the film, the relationship between the kid Omri and this Indian in this cupboard, played very well by Lightfoot, and the kid who plays Omri, House Scardino, is also very good here as well. You also have David Keith playing the cowboy that eventually comes to life in this. Richard Jenkins plays Omri's dad. Steve Coogan's also in the movie as well, so is Vincent Kartheiser of Mad Men fame. I mean, there's a lot in here that I really love about this movie. It's a movie that gets attention for the people that grew up with it, but whenever you talk to some people that don't know what this movie is, they really don't have a real interest in seeing it. But it's a really nicely made film. It's a really solid film overall, and I can't recommend it enough. I love this movie to death. The Indian in the Cupboard. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and definitely check it out, because it's definitely worth the watch if you really go into it with the right notes. So, with that said, let us move on to the next movie, and that is Steve Buscemi in the comedy Living in Oblivion. So the first time I ever heard about Living in Oblivion was from James Rolfe, aka the Angry Video Game Nerd, when he talked about his favorite movies of all time, and this was one of the movies on his list. And I never even thought about watching it, even after I saw that. It was kind of curious, but did watch it recently, and I gotta say, it's actually pretty funny. Like, it's a really solid movie, a sharp satirical look at what happens behind the scenes of a movie, and apparently the director Tom DiCillo actually took a lot of inspirations from the frustrations he made when he made the movie Johnny Suede, because that was the last movie he directed, and that movie was not very good. That movie was definitely not that good, but this movie definitely shows a lot of what his potential is as a writer and a director, because this is a really damn good movie. The cast is fantastic. You got Steve Buscemi as the director, Catherine Keener, Dermot Mulroney, James LeGros, Peter Dinklage. Just a phenomenal cast in here. Such a dark, twisted comedy that just really, it really gives you a lot of good laughs in this movie. It's really hilarious. It's very well done. And I'm glad I got to see it when I did a couple years ago. I actually want to get a physical copy of this, honestly. But if you haven't seen Living in Oblivion, I'd say definitely check it out. I think it's another one of those underrated gems that not a lot of people really talk about, but it's definitely worth a watch. So, yeah, I highly recommend Living in Oblivion. So, with that said, on to the last movie of the weekend, and that is Roosters. So you've got the story about this guy who's been in prison for 7 years after he murdered a man over a cockfight, and his family welcomes him back with mixed feelings. His daughter Angela is eager to have him back. His son Hector feels otherwise. Hector decides to leave behind the farm and wants to use the family's prize-winning cock, which he inherited from his grandfather, to win money in order to move his family away. However, when Gallo returns from prison, determined to continue the business and raise a new flock of roosters, the son and the father soon clash over the differing goals. And I don't know. I don't think there's enough here to really warrant this as something that you need to see. Like, from that trailer alone, it looks pretty generic to me, even though you got some really good talent here. Edward James Olmos, Sonia Braga, Maria Conchita Alonso, Danny Nucci. It's just not really all that interesting of a film. It doesn't, at least from the trailer that I saw, like, it doesn't really feel like anything interesting or anything like that. This is directed by the same guy that did Talent for the Game, to another movie with Edward James Olmos in it, but yeah, I don't really have no real need to see this movie. Like, I haven't seen it, so I can't really say too much about it, but that trailer did not sell me on this movie whatsoever. It actually kind of feels a little bit boring, honestly, so I mean, who knows? Maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe this is actually something pretty good, but that trailer did not sell that movie very well, so that is Roosters for you. And so on that note, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies. Next time, we'll take a look at Alicia Silverstone and Clueless, Free Willy 2, The Adventure Home, which is a very interesting part of my life, as I'll talk about in the next episode. We also have The Controversial Kids, and also An Awfully Big Adventure. So 4 movies to look at next time around. We'll delve into those on the next episode. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please hit the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for another episode. So thank you for watching, I'll see you next time, and until then, as always, take care.